In this campaign, I have seen our country's greatness. From the bottom of my heart, thank you, America. God bless you.
Former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley is suspending her presidential campaign. Coming up, I'll have a live report from here on Daniel Island, where she made that announcement earlier this morning.
And what does the suspension of Haley's campaign mean for her future? And what does a potential matchup between former President Trump and President Biden look like in November? Find out coming up. Good afternoon, and thanks so much for joining us on News 2 at 4. I'm Erin Morgan.
We're so glad you're here with us today. I'm Hannah Powers. News 2 is your local election headquarters, and former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley suspending her presidential campaign.
Yeah, Haley announced that she's dropping out of the race this morning on Daniel Island. And that's where we find News 2's Jordan Siopa for us. She is live. And Jordan, the announcement, a swift one this morning. What can you tell us?
Yeah, that's right. Nikki Haley was straight to the point, only taking a few minutes to formally end her presidential campaign. While she is no longer a candidate anymore, she vowed to continue using her voice for what she believes in. Now, during her speech, Haley reiterated many of the policies she built her campaign on, such as the need for smaller federal government, term limits for politicians, and supporting foreign allies. What started out as a crowded race for the GOP nomination is now likely to end in a victory for former President Donald Trump. Haley took time to congratulate the former president in her speech and wished him well, but stopped short of endorsing him. She called on him to earn the votes of those in the Republican Party and beyond who did not support him. Haley's exit comes just over a year after the February 2023 launch of her presidential campaign, also announced in Charleston. Despite trailing behind former President Trump in the polls and losing South Carolina primary last month, Haley insisted on staying in the race through Super Tuesday, but dropped out this morning after a poor showing.
I end my campaign with the same words I began it, from the book of Joshua. I direct them to all Americans, but especially to so many of the women and girls out there who put their faith in our campaign. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for God will be with you wherever you go.
And while she was unable to overtake former President Trump, she did win in Vermont and Washington, D.C., making her the very first woman to win a presidential Republican primary. Reporting live on Daniel Island, I'm Jordan Siopa. Count on 2.
Jordan, thank you. And as Nikki Haley officially drops out of the race, former President Trump released a statement earlier today following the results of Super Tuesday, saying in part, quote, Nikki Haley got trounced last night in record-setting fashion. He went on to say, quote, I'd like to thank my family, friends, and the great Republican Party for helping me to produce by far the most successful Super Tuesday in history, and would further like to invite all of the Haley supporters to join the greatest movement in the history of our nation, end quote.
And President Joe Biden also releasing a statement today following Haley's campaign suspension, encouraging Haley's supporters to vote for him. He said in part, quote, I want to be clear, there's a place for them in my campaign. I know there's a lot we won't agree on, but on the fundamental issues of preserving American democracy, on standing up for the rule of law, on treating each other with decency and dignity and respect, on preserving NATO and standing up to America's adversaries, I hope and believe we can find common ground.
And now that Nikki Haley has suspended her presidential campaign, former President Trump is now the presumptive Republican nominee, making way for a rematch between Trump and President Biden in November. After last night's Super Tuesday showing, former President Trump now has 1,059 delegates, while Haley ended with 93. 1,215 delegates are needed to win the nomination, but today we spoke to Gibbs Knotts, a political science professor at the College of Charleston, who says the focus now likely shifts to the general election. He pointed out that Haley did not endorse former President Trump during her remarks this morning, and instead she called on him to try and earn the support of the voters who backed her during the primaries. In the past, former President Trump has posted on social media that anyone who contributes to Haley's platform cannot be a part of his Make America Great Again base. Today we spoke to Knotts about how this could impact his campaign moving forward.
He's going to need the Haley supporters, not to get the nomination, obviously, but when it comes to the general election, so those folks could do one of two things. They could vote for Joe Biden, or they could just not participate, or they could decide not to cast a vote. And so it's really important if Donald Trump wants to win in the general to bring many of those Haley supporters back over to his side, or it's going to be a repeat of what happened in 2020.
However, Knotts also pointed out that President Biden's low approval ratings could impact his re-election campaign. He says Biden needs to make a better case for his policies, especially immigration, which is at the top of voters' minds heading into November.
And we also know that Representative Dean Phillips of Minnesota has suspended his campaign for the Democratic presidential nomination and is endorsing President Joe Biden. Phillips originally launching his campaign because he disagreed with Biden's handlings of the influx of migrants at the southern border. Although now that he is out of the race, Phillips says he will, quote, do everything humanly possible to ensure Joe Biden's re-election this November because it's that existential, end quote. We have a full recap of Super Tuesday results, Nikki Haley's remarks and comments from the presidential candidates all on our website, counton2.com.